So religion is a vehicle. Religion is a collection, to my definition, of the transmission of spiritual experiences and the establishment of practices to facilitate this for other people. Right? So all the things within Judaism, we have our 613 commandments, our mitzvot. Do this, do this, do this, wear this, do that. We don't do that for the sake of doing that. We do that in order to elevate ourselves. Right? We wear fringes on our garments during prayer services to remind ourselves of our obligations to other people. I wear a kippah during the day on my head because that little tickle on my head reminds me that I'm more than just a physical being. Right? No, that's the purpose. That's my view of religion. Okay. Let's talk about ego a little bit. So we're moving our way down. Ego gets a bad rap, right? If you read Eckhart Tolle or other people, it's about getting rid of the ego. The ego is simply the overlay that's been put on us so we can survive within physicality. Ego is our desire for protection. Ego is a series of desires that we have that our physicality calls out for so we can be protected. Without that, if we were just spirit and physicality, we'd have no ability to survive. The problem is when we think that our ego is ourselves and we think that that's all that there is, then we get into trouble, right? That's what most traditions teach. That's certainly a Buddhist tradition. Judaism says in the Talmud, how do you live? By destroying yourself. And this is the self it's talking about. Now work. And I struggled with work. And I could not come up with a great definition. And I'd actually like to see if anybody here can share some thoughts. What does the word work mean to you? Any volunteers?
It's a form of connection with the physical world.
It's how you connect to the physical world.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts about work? Look, it's the way you make a buck, right? Okay. I mean, that's one answer. Any other thoughts about work? Yeah.
An expression of passion.
Beautiful expression of passion. And I'm really asking because I don't have a good working definition. Other thoughts about work? Okay. How to serve others. Terrific. All I could come up with is that which we do. Right? The stuff that we do. This is. I think what you all said was wonderful. Is work. I want to propose a different way that we think about work in a very interesting way. Oh, I'm sorry. So, a different way of looking at work. So, in Hebrew, the word for work is called avodah, and this is in the Bible. Avodah, interestingly, is also the word for prayer. So, within the Jewish spiritual tradition, work, and this is a Buddhist tradition as well and Christian in some way, that work and prayer are not different things. They're actually the exact same thing. Right? So that just as we work for physical sustenance, right, we pray for spiritual sustenance. And just as work requires connection, prayer requires effort. Right? We tend to think that prayer should be easy and it should just come. The teaching is prayer requires work, and work requires prayer. So let's look at what we said about prayer again. The conscious practice to connect with spirit in order to facilitate personal and communal transformation. That could be a definition of work. And I think that responds to what we said earlier, our passion, our service. If we think about work in that way, as we go to work every day, it's going to powerfully change what we do and how we act. If I go into my office and say, I'm here to connect with spirit and to help other people do the same thing in a way that transforms them, suddenly my work has turned upside down on its head. And I'm not just looking to get ahead of the next guy. And that's an insight that Judaism has to offer. So how can we do this? I mean, these are all great principles, and they sound very good. I want to say a few things, about work also within the Jewish tradition, which I'm most familiar with. In the Talmud, which is the Jewish book of ethical and moral debate, that's about as long as that table if you line it all up, that was compiled between the years 200 BC and 600 AD or so. There's this wonderful question that the rabbis ask. And they say, what's the first question that the heavenly court asks you? In other words, after you die, right, and you're sitting in judgment, again, this is metaphorical, if you will, maybe not, and you're sitting in judgment, what would be the one question that would be asked of your life to determine how well it was lived? Right? One rabbi says, did you pray? And they go, that sounds pretty good. Another one says, did you give to charity? Sounds great. Did you study? Sounds good. One rabbi with chutzpah, as we say, with a little bit of nerve, says, were you ethical at work? And everybody immediately goes, that's the question. If you were ethical at work, with all the temptations that work has to offer, with all the inclinations to not be that way, and if you overcame that and were ethical at work, you've led a great spiritual life. That's what the rabbis have to say. There's also a wonderful story about this man called Safra. And Safra is a poor man trying to sell a donkey. And he's standing by the side of the road, and around the neck of this donkey it says, for sale. Meanwhile, Safra stops to do his afternoon prayers, what they call his mincha prayers in Hebrew. And a very wealthy man comes by in need of a donkey. And he sees the donkey, and he pokes Safra as Safra's praying, right? He pokes Safra on the shoulder and says, I'd like to buy your donkey. I'll give you $100 for it. Safra can't answer because he's praying. So the man, thinking his offer is too low and he's still in need of the donkey, says, I'll give you $200 for the donkey. Safra still doesn't answer because he's praying. Finally, the man says, I'll give you $300 for your donkey. Finally, Safra's done praying, and he looks at the man and he says, your first offer was acceptable. I'm not going to use the fact that I was praying to take advantage of what was a good offer in the first place that I would have taken anyways. Right? There's a great example of the ethical businessman. And in my imagining, that story keeps on going. And the ethical and the wealthy man recognizes in Safra an ethical man. And he does more business with Safra. And he sends his friends, you got to do some business with Safra. He's a great businessman. Soon Safra has a teeming store, right? The man has a good deal on a donkey and everybody wins, right? So the distinction I'd like to make in terms of how do we apply this at work and in our lives is to differentiate between greed and abundance, right? And to many people, these are the same words. I'm going to show you one last clip about greed that I think most of you are going to know.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. Greed in all of its forms. Greed for life, for money, for love, knowledge, has marked the upward surge of mankind, and greed, you mark my words, will not only save Telltale paper, but that other malfunctioning corporation called the USA. Thank you very much.
All right. We've heard that definition of greed before, right? Right. So I want to differentiate between greed and abundance. And this is a very crucial differentiation. And I think it's somewhat at the core of what I want to talk about. To make it very simple, and a lot of people struggle with this differentiation, let me give you an example of two children. And again, this is a very simple example, so bear with me, but I think it'll clarify it. And you imagine two children on Christmas morning, or whatever their birthday, right? And they get a pile of presents, right? And one child runs over to the pile of presents, opens the presents, feels great about getting all this wonderful stuff, knows his parents, loves him, feels blessed to have everything, and is playing happily. The other child runs over, tears them all open, doesn't find the thing he's looking for, and goes, how come I never get what I want? Why is the world so unfair? Right? The first one looks over at the second one, and he doesn't get it. He says, how come he can't be happy with what he has? We could play together if he did. Right? Very simple distinction between greed and abundance. And let's kind of drill down a little bit more.